This story began in a low-level dungeon, where the ground suddenly cracked, and a huge stone monster with a round head attacked a hunter who defended himself with a shield. The other guild members immediately shouted, urging him not to give up. But their encouragement only enraged the monster, who smashed the man's shield and shattered it. Another hunter stepped up to deflect the monster's strike with his sword, but the black-haired hunter beside him yelled, telling him not to fight like that. Seeing their teammates struggling, the other guild members decided it was the right moment to jump into the fight. One hunter slashed the monster's arm with a mana-infused blade, while the low-budget Saitama struck it with a stick. In response, the monster's eyes glowed red with fury. Just then, the furious monster started to advance, so the guy with the huge shield shouted in fear, asking the team to take a defensive stance while the mage finished it off. The mage, holding a staff with a glowing crystal on top, shouted at our protagonist, ordering him to make himself useful and give him some mana. Hearing this, our protagonist, Horuto, nicknamed Mana Gopher, a level 29 hunter dealer, closed his eyes and summoned blue mana from his hands, directing it into the mage with the cap. With this, the mage smiled, now confident he had enough mana to defeat the stone monster. When the monster moved to attack again, the mage summoned fire from his crystal, hurling it at the monster while demanding it to die twice. After the intense battle, our boy sat on the ground, exhausted. The team leader in armor approached, asking why he was tired, since he was totally useless throughout the fight, and then ordered him to carry the loot. One guild member wondered aloud why Haruto supported from the back if he was a hunter-dealer. Another, a yellow-haired member, replied that the boy was practically worthless, though lucky enough to generate infinite mana. Haruto listened silently as the guy continued, saying Haruto's skills were kind of cool. But the yellow-haired guy corrected him, remarking that Haruto's skills weren't cool. They were the most useless skill in the world, since mages could get mana from healers, and such a massive supply of mana was only needed during boss fights. The mage in the cap joined in, saying that's why Haruto hadn't reached level 30 even after 5 years of grinding as a hunter. Hearing the guy's gossip about his weaknesses, Haruto started sweating in embarrassment, wondering why the bastards would gossip so loudly that he could hear. However, he resolved in his heart that he wouldn't quit, no matter what anyone said about his skills. Later that day at the Great Sage Guild, Haruto angrily slammed his hand on the table, asking the chief why he was being transferred to the manufacturing department. The gray-haired chief responded, saying there was no one willing to hunt with him because he was still a level 29 hunter, and his skill was practically useless. Haruto tried to persuade the old man, arguing that he could provide enough mana for a hunt and would soon reach level 30. But the man replied that most mages and healers had enough mana of their own, so Haruto's skills didn't add much value. Feeling anxious, Haruto asked if things would change once he reached level 30, but the chief told him it wouldn't make a difference. His skills were better suited for the mana potion division. Haruto angrily asked if refusing the transfer meant he'd be kicked out of the guild. The man explained that if they saw no potential for his growth, he would indeed be thrown out like garbage. Following this, Haruto sat on a bench with a drink and burger, clutching his chest in depression over his looming unemployment. Although everyone considered his mana generation skills useless, our boy actually had another skill that no one knew about. Grabbing his burger, a system window suddenly appeared, asking if he wanted to copy the target. Haruto pressed Ctrl+C, and amid a flash of blue mana, the burger duplicated. With his Ctrl+C and Ctrl+V abilities, Haruto could copy and paste any target. However, this skill was exclusive to him. When he placed the duplicate burger on the bench and removed his hands, it dissolved into a blue scroll-like light. Anything he duplicated vanished as soon as he let go, preventing him from using it to make money or sell copied items. As he ate, he reflected sadly that even his copying skill had limitations. There were some things he couldn't duplicate until he reached level 90 or above. Frustrated, he gritted his teeth, knowing that if he could just level up a bit, he'd be able to copy weapons and hunt more effectively. Afterwards, he looked at his phone and saw that the Collision Dragon's sword had arrived in the city. This sword granted users enhanced defensive powers and could assign levels. The moment it was wielded, the user's level increased by 200, and it could be equipped by anyone, level 30 or higher. That moment, Haruto began picturing himself in armor, wielding the Collision sword. He knew the sword was his best hope to level up, making it his top priority. The Collision sword would soon be displayed in the city for everyone to see, as it was no longer used in battle, but rather as an exhibition piece to make money. Haruto then decided he'd use this opportunity to touch the sword and make a duplicate with his copying skill. Smiling, he continued to stare at his phone, thinking that if he could just reach level 30, his dream of wielding the sword would come true. A few days later, the guild members were battling monster spiders in the dungeon, giving it all they had. This particular lair was in an unregistered dungeon. The yellow-haired guy turned back, calling Haruto a spectator and asking him for mana, so Haruto agreed, channeling mana into him. Feeling invigorated, the guy unleashed a powerful fire attack that eliminated most of the monster spiders. Amid the blinding light, the guy leveled up, so Haruto opened his system window to see if he'd leveled up as well. But the black-haired member, named Ikanaga, approached, advising him not to bother checking because nothing would change. Our boy looked back in fear and lied that he was just preparing for the boss fight. Hearing this, Ikanaga walked away, but not before telling Haruto to pay a spectator fee since he was just watching while they fought. Despite the dungeon's danger and lack of Hunter Association registration, Haruto resolved to join the hunters so he could at least level up. After gathering the loot, the team moved deeper into the dungeon to face the final boss. Entering the chamber, they found the giant mother spider busy wrapping her precious eggs in webs. This was Alexa, a level 80 spider boss. Seeing the mother spider, Haruto felt terrified, but Ikanaga assured him there was no need to fear since he wasn't actually fighting. Ikanaga advised everyone to be strategic to avoid getting trapped in the spider's silk, which could immobilize them. He also warned against disturbing the eggs, which could make the mother spider hostile. The yellow-haired guy scoffed, asking why Ikanaga bothered to explain anything to Haruto since he was useless and wouldn't be in the fight. With that, the yellow-haired dude advanced toward the spider, but a stray stone landed in spider silk, alerting the mother. She roared, baring her sharp, dagger-like teeth, and launched her claws at the frightened team. The team leader deflected her attack with his shield and warned everyone to avoid the eggs and webs during the attack. Together, the team attacked the mother spider, causing her to roar in pain. Watching from the side, Haruto smiled, confident that he'd level up soon, thanks to the strong team. Just then, the mother spider backed away, and the team leader shouted for everyone to hide behind the pillars. She was about to release her silk webs. Ignoring the warning, the yellow-haired guy believed his fire would easily eliminate the spider. But when he launched his attack, the spider shot out her silk, forming an entangled web that blocked the flames effortlessly. The dude became furious, ready to launch another fire attack, but Haruto shouted, asking him to stop. However, this stubborn goat had already launched another massive inferno. Seeing this, the team leader yelled at the ugly gorilla that his attack would crack the mother spider's egg, while Haruto watched, clenching his teeth because it was too late. That instant, the fire heated the eggs, breaking them. The leader, scared for his team's life, ordered everyone to get out of there. But the mother spider had already unleashed a massive coat of silk webs. Seeing this, the team began to run, while Haruto watched in absolute horror. The massive cloth of silk web covered Haruto's entire body, and the yellow-haired dude was not left out. The mother spider, with menacing glowing eyes, approached the dude. The guy began to scream for help, but he was chopped to pieces by the spider's sharp claw. Seeing that, Haruto's face poured out a bucket of sweat in absolute horror. The monster spider then approached, opening her wide mouth filled with sharp teeth. Seeing this, Haruto began to cry, watching his entire life flash from within his eyes as he never believed he was going to die in a bid to level up. The monster spider lifted her claws, and the instant impaled his back, spewing blood as he screamed in pain. He coughed out blood and was ready to damn the consequence. Just then, the system window popped out of nowhere, asking if he would like to paste what he had copied. Before Haruto entered the dungeon, the genius came up with a brilliant idea. He'd make copies of his uninjured self. This way, each time he died, a flawless version of him would automatically be pasted back in place, making his corpse vanish. Without wasting time, he pasted his unscathed self back into the dungeon. But before he could even brace himself, the spider's sharp claw impaled him from behind, instantly eliminating him. However, the system reactivated Ctrl+V, asking if he'd like to paste his copied self again. Seconds later, he was back in the dungeon, this time hiding behind a wall far from the spider's line of sight. He knew he had to find a way out, but as he turned, he suddenly heard a voice and noticed that a guild member named Aoi was still alive, tied to the wall in the spider's silk. This changed his plan, and he grinned in frustration. As the spider advanced toward Aoi, Haruto was pissed because he couldn't just leave the idiot to die. He quickly grabbed a copy of a sword and charged at the spider, like he had any plan. He swung his blade at one of the spider's legs and narrowly dodged an attack, poised to save him. Just then, the system notified him that he'd leveled up. Hearing this, Haruto was shocked, and his eyes widened in total disbelief as he wondered why he had leveled up. He wondered if it was because he had finally had the balls to attack for the first time in his life. In that moment of distraction, the spider took advantage, stabbing him in the gut. But the system quickly reactivated Ctrl+V, pasting Haruto right back into the dungeon. This time, he was ready to face the mother spider head-on, determined to keep fighting, even if it meant dying 100 times. With that in mind, our boy rushed at the spider, rest assured that his copy and paste ability would be useful. It was only a matter of dying numerous times, but he thought surely he would be able to defeat the spider. 3 days passed and Haruto was still fighting the monster spider and had died 50 times already. All the weapons in the dungeon he had copied and pasted had all been destroyed. He was losing all his body fluids through sweating, but he was still wielding his sword, ready to keep fighting. The monster spider gradually grew weaker as the fight lingered on, and she was also badly injured because she had no healing abilities. Just then, the giant spider stared at Haruto and fired silk balls at him. But he had already been defeated by the same move 4 times already, so he dodged, causing the balls to crash into the wall behind him. The attack didn't stop as the giant monster attacked with her claw, but Haruto jumped high, and as he descended with anger in his face, he slashed the head of the spider with his blade. But the sword broke in half on impact while he slammed to the ground. With that, the monster spider furiously lunged at him, and on seeing this, he froze in fear. Luckily, the giant spider's body, out of exhaustion, began to crack, and suddenly, her body parts were scattered everywhere. Haruto lay on the ground and laughed like a madman because, finally, he had done it, even though it took him dying 56 times. Suddenly, a lot of system windows popped in front of him, notifying him that he had leveled up. The system also informed him that he had acquired a reward item for defeating the giant spider. With the mother spider defeated, he carried Aoi, his guildmate, while muttering that all he needed right now was a bottle of whiskey. However, at that moment, a giant ball of silk slammed his chest, causing him severe pain as he crashed to the ground, dropping Aoi. He looked up in shock to see the mother spider babies who recently hatched in front of him. He'd exclaimed that they ought to be kidding because he had no more weapons to fight with. He knew he would be fine, but Aoi would definitely enter the afterlife. That instant, one of the baby spiders charged at them, and in fear, he covered Aoi with his body, ready to sacrifice himself. Suddenly, a blue wave sliced the baby spider in half. The other baby spiders noticed this attack and began to rush at the person who had done this. In front of them stood a hot baddie in a ponytail wielding a spear. The girl shouted hellfire and released blue fire magic from her staff that consumed all the monster spider babies in one swoop. Hellfire was one fire attribute that was at the highest level of all fire magic, and only a handful of mages could execute such a skill. Haruto looked at the girl in shock, because if his memories served him right, there was only one mage in all of Japan that could execute the hellfire. She was called the Witchblade, a magic swordsman who used a spear sword and was ranked 5th in Japan's hunting ranking. The bad chick turned, asking Haruto if they were the only survivors. Haruto, still carrying Aoi on his shoulders, responded by telling her yes. The girl then turned and looked at the carnage in front of her. She thought that if the giant spider babies were released, then someone must have broken the eggs, causing them to go berserk. She also noticed that all the high-level hunters had been wiped out, and was surprised that Haruto was the only one who survived such a fierce boss. Even more surprising, the boy had all the time in the world to actually save someone. Surely the boy was clearly a low-level hunter judging by his sissy face, and then she wondered how the hell Haruto did that. Later on, at the Hunters Association building in the interrogation room, Haruto awkwardly thanked the chick named Nanase for saving them, saying they wouldn't have made out alive if it weren't for her. Nanase responded, telling him she was just doing her job as a member of the association. She placed the drop item of the giant spider on the table, saying it had been reported, and then told Haruto he was free to go. Haruto stood in shock and questioned whether, even though high-level adventurers had bought a pass into an illegal dungeon and were all wiped out, she was just letting him go. Nanase replied, telling him that dozens of accidents happened daily in the dungeon, so it wasn't a big deal, shocking Haruto. She added that about the illegal participation in the dungeon, the association allowed the involvement of low-level hunters to offer money to join high-level hunters for the sole purpose of leveling up. She then looked at Haruto, asking if there were any other questions, and Haruto awkwardly told her she explained it clearly and thanked her. Nanas held up the giant spider item drop and told him his share of the money for the item drop would be sent to him in a few days, but our boy refused, asking her to give his share to Avoidi. He then walked out of the interrogation room, leaving Nancy brooding about who the heck the guy was just to give out a huge amount of money and also be the sole survivor of the dungeon. With that alone, she felt the boy was definitely hiding something. Meanwhile, Haruto walked down the hallway of the Hunter Association smiling, saying that everything was a success. He then opened his inventory and found the giant spider stick, thinking that this rod would definitely be useful to him. A few hours ago, just after he defeated the mother spider, he received an item as a reward. The item was the giant spider stick, which granted the user a strong adhesive power for a certain number of time. Back in the present, Haruto stared at the spider rod in disappointment and felt he had died multiple times just to receive some stupid strong glue as a reward. Anyway, he decided to make a copy of the rod in case he someday went camping. It might be useful for catching bugs. He then activated Ctrl+C to copy the rod, after which he opened the rod, wondering how the superglue worked. However, suddenly the rod amidst a blue light began to disappear from his hands, and he looked around, wondering where the rod went. Just then, the system window popped up, informing him that the spider stick had been absorbed into an existing skill. Another window appeared, notifying him that his Ctrl+V pasting ability had leveled up. Haruto stared at the window in disbelief, as he never thought his copy and paste ability could also level up. Another system window popped up telling him that concerning his copying ability, the evolution was being controlled. He wondered what that meant, and just then, another window appeared informing him his Ctrl+V pasting ability had leveled up to 1, and because of that, 3 new skills were available. Haruto questioned why his pasting ability had suddenly evolved and wondered if it was because of the spider stick he absorbed. If that was the case, if he found an item compatible with his copy ability, then it should also evolve. With that, Haruto laughed happily at these cool discoveries, and then clicked on the window to check the 3 newly added options to his pasting ability. He was stunned when he read that the options included that he could copy and paste an item for a desired period of time, he could paste the item anywhere for a specific period of time, and lastly, he could untie the spider thread. Seeing this, Haruto smiled in total joy, because he had initially expected it to be some useless ability. So he decided to try it out. He dropped the copy and pasted spider stick to the ground, hoping it would vanish as he left his hands, but he realized the stick just stayed on the ground. After a minute, it disappeared, so he decided to make more copies and set the timer for 30 minutes, 100 years, and 1,000 years. After that, he shouted happily because, with his upgraded skill, he would definitely be richer than Elon Musk and become the best hunter there was. But first, he needed to copy and paste the Callison, dragon's long sword. 2 hours earlier, on Tokyo's Rainbow Bridge, a blue truck sped along, overtaking every car in sight. Inside, Grant, an ugly albino guy, asked Aries, a girl sitting beside him, how many times she had visited Japan. She replied she'd been there twice before. Grant wondered if returning to her mother's hometown made her emotional, but Aries, adjusting her glasses, said it was her mother's hometown, not hers. Grant then reminded her that the long sword exhibition would conclude in Japan and asked if she'd applied for her vacation. She confirmed, adding she wanted to explore the Japanese dungeon. Grant, resting his head on his hand, wished her luck in finding what she was looking for. She dismissed him, warning that his filthy attitude would get him in trouble one day. Suddenly, a voice broadcasted across the bridge, announcing the lead car was entering the Rainbow Bridge dungeon, meaning they'd lose communication for 5 minutes due to the dungeon's electromagnetic waves. Just then, a blue light flickered, and Grant looked out the truck's window in shock, realizing there was a dungeon below the bridge. Aries, skeptical, remarked that too much alcohol must be messing with his brain, as a dungeon collapse would be catastrophic. Meanwhile, at the Rainbow Bridge Management Office, Satoru, one of the staff, yawned, complaining that office work was the most boring thing ever. A stone-faced dude retorted, calling him an ugly, disgusting dachebag who was unqualified to be there. The grumpy guy named Sakabe then informed him that he was indeed lucky because, just 3 weeks ago, it had been chaotic. Suddenly, Satoru noticed a slime creature at his feet. which he picked up and remarked that slimes belonged in the dungeon, not outside. At that moment, Sakade felt something press against his back, and he turned to see a giant troll looming in the office. Back at the Hunter Association building, Horuto stared at the system window and smiled because all his stats had increased after defeating the mother spider. In just a little time, he would reach level 50. When Hunter got to level 50, it was easier to join a hunting party. Excluding low-level dungeons for beginners, monsters at the intermediate level are usually above level 50. In the intermediate level dungeons, a hunter would gain experience points and rewards, and sometimes rare items may appear. Horuto, fully satisfied, thought it would be best to make a copy of the spider stick and sell it at an auction. Just then, he heard a voice, so he turned back and saw a group of hunters running worriedly while someone shouted to make way. Someone shouted, asking how would the dungeon collapse all of a sudden. Hearing this, Horuto wondered if he heard right, and if it was just a dungeon break. A hunter with a bandage on his head asked why they were the first guild to be alerted when there were other big guilds. The other guy, who looked like his face had swallowed his eyes, replied, telling him the truck that was carrying the legendary sword had also been trapped, so all the guilds were involved. Hearing this, our boy was horrified because his beloved Collision Long sword was involved in the dungeon break. Meanwhile, on the Hunters Association rooftop, several airships landed. A hunter instructed the rest to hurriedly request help from other guilds because protecting the truck carrying the longsword was their topmost priority. Another voice exclaimed, asking who gave that nonsense priority. Nancy appeared from nowhere, instructing the guild that, as their instructor, their topmost priority would be to defeat the monsters and protect the civilians. At that moment, she noticed in the distance a psychopath trying to enter the airship but was restrained by the security. So she quickly ordered the guild member to hurry into the airship. Surprisingly, the crazed person was Horuto, who screamed, begging Nanas to go with her since all the guild members were going except him. At that moment, Nancy immediately recognized that the nutcase was indeed Horuto. Horuto continued shouting like a psychiatric patient that he would defeat the monsters and save the civilians. After a while, the airship flew to the Rainbow Bridge, and inside, Nanas remarked that she had allowed Horuto to join the mission because he had once saved Aoi back in the dungeon. Hearing this, our boy smiled innocently, but deep down, he knew he had joined the mission purely for selfish reasons. Just then, one of the hunters remarked that it was strange for the Rainbow Bridge that had just stabilized 3 weeks ago to collapse. Nanase stood in their middle and responded that anything could happen in the world, and that a building that had collapsed once might collapse again. She added that they were mobilized to prevent a repeat of the disaster of 15 years ago. Hearing this triggered memories of 15 years ago for Horuto. 15 years ago, a dungeon break comparable to a natural disaster occurred. A dungeon break occurs when monsters are not cleared regularly, causing the dungeon to become saturated and hence collapse. As a result, the monsters escape the dungeon and start attacking the civilian of the world. Horuto had lost his parents due to a dungeon break. When he was little, his mother was run over by a car, and just then a bright light appeared. Amidst the bright light, a transcendental being from another dimension appeared, giving Horuto his ability to copy and paste. The intense light pierced his heart, while he screamed in intense pain, and after that, the being said only one thing: 20 years. However, he was clueless as to whether the 20 years was the expiration time for his ability or his lifespan. Even at this moment, the 20-year hourglass continued to fall. Horuto remembered that the transcendental being had appeared because of the great disaster. He clutched his throat and thought that the transcendental being would only appear if there were a great disaster, and what was left of his 20 years was just 5 years. Meanwhile, back at the Rainbow Bridge, an explosion occurred, and the enraged monsters hurled cars into the air, scaring out of the civilians. Hunters began to attack the monster from all directions, and Satoru, who stayed and watched, thought the hunters were few and, at this rate, they would not be able to protect all the civilians. Suddenly, he noticed an ugly Ord rushing to attack him, so he quickly gave the monster a Photoshop cut with his blade. Just then, another monster sneaked behind him with a stick to plaster his head. But at that moment, a dagger from nowhere pierced the monster in the gut. SpongeBob Head, totally displeased, instructed Satoru not to be distracted, so Seitumtu smiled and thanked him for saving his life. With that, Sakabe informed him that the next time he got distracted, he would let him see what Nirvana was like. Horuto nodded, but thought that even though the guy looked uglier than Shrek, he still had a caring heart and had saved him twice from the monsters. With that, he resolved in his mind to pay Sakib back someday. He then asked Sakib about reinforcements. Sakib responded by telling him that the communications were jammed because of the electromagnetic waves on the bridge, but he was sure they were already on their way at the moment. He suggested they cross the bridge to get to the reinforcements sooner. Satoru asked if they should run in the direction of the monsters, and Sakib responded that it was better to run that way than stay and get chewed by the monsters. Just then, a ferocious level 190 Perman King attacked the blue truck. Seeing this, Grant asked Ares if they would be okay. Ares then activated a magical cycle and told the moron to be rest assured that her defense magic was top tier. Even a level 400 monster couldn't scratch it. Suddenly, the Rainbow Bridge began to collapse, and seeing this, Ares informed Grant that even the highest level of defense magic would be useless against something like that. Meanwhile, Satoru and Mr. Q had looked up to find the airship hovering above them. Inside the airship, one of the hunters stared out the window and frighteningly shouted for Nanas to look outside. Nanas looked outside the window and noticed a giant red dragon, the boss of the Rainbow Bridge dungeon, emerging from the water. Nanas was terrified to the bones and loudly ordered everyone to prepare themselves for the attack. That moment, the dragon opened his mouth and blasted a massive fiery energy at the airship, destroying the entire bridge in the process. Seeing this destruction, Haruto in the ship was stunned, hoping his longsword was intact, not concerned about anybody else. Just then, an airship floated above the dragon, and without hesitation, the dragon launched a massive fireball at it, engulfing it in flames. With that, Nanase and the other hunters jumped down from the burning ship, and upon landing, she informed her team of a new priority. Their focus was now on taking down the dragon. She looked around, wondering where Haruto was, but assumed he was fine wherever he was. At that moment, she activated Hellfire, summoning a blue flame from her staff that blasted toward the dragon. Meanwhile, Haruto noticed the blue flame, thought it looked amazing, and made a mental note to copy it someday. Just as he landed, a web formed around him, and the system notified him that the giant spider's thread had been released. However, his main focus was still copying the collision longsword. Suddenly, a group of masked men appeared, aiming to steal the collision longsword. Their leader noted that while the appearance of the red dragon was unexpected, it worked to their advantage as Nanasis and her team would be preoccupied. This gave them the perfect opportunity to snatch the sword. Meanwhile, Haruto walked past a pile of dead wolves and remarked that this massacre was clearly the work of another hunter. However, he knew wolves usually attacked in packs, and just then, he heard someone yelling for another to run. There, he saw Satoru slashing at a wolf, defiantly proclaiming he wasn't some scared chicken, and wouldn't flee because he could handle monsters at this level. On the ground was Sakib, clutching his wound, urging Satoru to run and stop playing the hero, but Satoru refused to leave him behind. From behind a car, Haruto observed the two conversing and recognized them as hunters from the dungeon office, one of whom was injured. He decided not to interfere, figuring they were big boys who could handle themselves. On the other hand, Sakib shouted in frustration, reminding Satoru that although these were low-ranking monsters, a pack became high-ranking threats. At that moment, a horde of monstrous wolves with red, menacing eyes emerged from the shadows. Satoru clenched his teeth in anger, vowing to protect his senior, who had been hurt covering for him. Watching Satoru's determination, Haruto was reminded of the time he had saved Aoi in the dungeon. At the same time, Satoru, in a defensive stance, prepared to fight to the death. Suddenly, a wolf lunged at him, and he effortlessly sliced it down. Another wolf attacked from behind, but he blocked it with his arm and pierced it through the throat. As he continued battling, a wolf tried to ambush him from behind. Just then, Haruto intercepted, blocking the attack with his shoulder and taking down the wolf. He turned to ask if Satoru was okay, and Satoru replied with a nod but nervously pointed out that over 100 more wolves were still lurking. With that, Satoru thanked Haruto, but urged him to leave, saying even a high-ranking hunter would struggle against so many wolves. But our boy simply smiled, saying it was perfect, leaving Satoru wondering what the guy had been smoking. Haruto then activated his window as the wolves charged, thinking of combining the giant king spider's thread with his skills to see how effective it'd be against a horde. Satoru, watching in fear, wondered what the psycho was planning. In a flash, the spider silk began binding the wolves one by one, wrapping them up into a massive web of silk. That moment, the system notified Haruto that he'd leveled up. However, he was slightly disappointed since binding the wolves didn't level him up as he had expected. but nevertheless, it neutralized the wolves. Still, he wondered what to do with the bound wolves. Meanwhile, Satoru watched in shock, amazed that Haruto had neutralized the wolves with just a skill. Sakaba, still on the ground, thanked Haruto and asked if he was part of the reinforcements. Haruto, clueless but wanting to end the conversation, answered yes. Sakaba then requested Haruto take Satoru with him, but Satoru stepped forward, insisting he wouldn't abandon his friend, even if it meant dying with him. Haruto, touched by the pathetic display at bromance, sighed and pulled a red potion from his inventory, handing it to Sakaba, explaining it was a healing potion to help him recover so he could move. Sakaba, shocked at the generosity, asked why Haruto would give him something so valuable. Haruto smiled, saying he had to return home with Satoru. Satoru, equally shocked, thought it was the coolest thing ever, thanked Haruto, bowed and introduced himself, promising to repay the kindness someday. Haruto, glancing toward the bridge, awkwardly asked if he could actually use that favor now by showing him to the International Hunter Association trailer. Meanwhile, back at the trailer, the Burman King roared and then crashed to the ground. Seeing this, Grant asked Ares if she had put the bear to sleep, and then asked why Ares would always choose to avoid fighting even as a hunter. Just then, a metal ball appeared before them. Grant noticed it and sliced it in half. He smirked and said he knew someone was around, trying to take advantage of the commotion to get the sword. On the other hand, Ares was surprised at what she saw. Suddenly, in front of them, the masked men appeared, saying Grant's skills were pretty impressive, and they would love to see what he could do. The masked guy immediately attacked Grant, but Grant parried the attack with his blade, asking the masked dude not to underestimate him, even though he acted as a guard for the legendary sword. That moment, the masked guy stepped back and Grant rushed to attack, but suddenly, something paralyzed his entire body, so he fell to his knees and began to cough out blood. Seeing this, Ares ran as fast as she could towards him and told him the masked guys were using a poisonous item that blocked mana, and if he continued fighting, he was definitely going to die. Hearing this, the masked guy responded, telling Ares that she had a pretty good intuition and had observed well, because this was their usual way of doing things. Ares gritted her teeth in anger, asking the usual way, using poisonous items against people despite the Hunter Association prohibiting using such items. In that case, she swore to make them regret it 1,000,000 times. Just then, a yellow light formed around her finger, and the masked man unleashed a fireball on seeing it. With this, the masked guy's assistant said they would be heading for the long sword. However, just then, his head was sliced off. The masked guy turned, questioning what had happened, but suddenly he was faced with an enraged Burman King who roared, and without hesitation, began to unleash mayhem on the masked thieves. The masked leader then tried to escape from the scene and was shocked that the bear was not dead but just unconscious. After that, the Burman King then faced the blue van, and on seeing this, Ares muttered that it was their turn. Grant, breathing heavily, asked if she could put the bear to sleep again, to which Ares responded, telling him they couldn't absorb any mana at the moment. Grant told her that he knew one day her whole non-violent life would be the end of her. Ares smiled, telling him he didn't have to die because of her. That instant, she charged at the bear, casting a yellow magical cycle, and Grant shouted what she was doing. However, just then, Ares began coughing out blood and thought about how the mana absorption was stopping her from using her magic. Suddenly, the Burman King charged at her angrily, but at that moment, a window popped up in front of her, asking the user if he would like to paste what he had copied, surprising Ares. In an instant, a web spun tightly around the Burman King just as Haruto and his team arrived. Haruto quickly asked Ares if she was all right, and if she was with the International Hunters Association, but Ares was too shocked to respond. Grant immediately drew his sword, demanding to know if Haruto and his crew were also after the longsword. Haruto denied it faster than Eminem could spit a rap verse, saying they were there to help protect the sword, not steal it. However, Grant didn't buy his disgusting lie, pointing his blade and telling Haruto he wasn't about to believe that filthy lie, especially right after they'd almost been robbed. Just then, Satoru flashed his identification badge, affirming that they were Hunters Association members and asking why Grant was treating their savior like a thief, especially after he'd risked his life to help them. Haruto smiled, grateful that the clueless moron had unknowingly done all the work to win them over. What was left was to win their trust by acting super kind. So to seal the deal, Haruto pulled a bottle of red healing liquid from his inventory and offered it to Grant and Ares, intending this as an investment to earn their trust, and ultimately the collision dragon longsword. Soon an airship appeared above. Grant glanced up, remarking that it looked like reinforcements had finally arrived, while Satoru cheered that they were saved at last. Grant, however, warned him not to celebrate yet, noting this wasn't the Great Sage Guild's ship. Meanwhile, Nanas was battling the dragon and suddenly commanded her team to hold fire as the dragon had entered Phase 3, meaning it could start launching shockwaves. She landed, noting the supporting guild's arrival, and declared that the mission was now to buy time until all civilians were evacuated. Just then, a voice behind her sneered, asking if that was really how they handled dungeon breaks. She turned to see a low-budget Lil Wayne named Masato, a level 503 dark mage from the future guild. Shocked, Nanas demanded to know why the donkey was there, to which Masato replied with a smirk, saying she shouldn't be asking dumb questions. Nanas then yelled at him, warning him not to do what she suspected. Instantly, a red magic seal appeared in front of the dragon. Before she could intervene, Masato taunted her, saying he didn't give two shits about what she wanted. Last time they'd faced off on the Rainbow Bridge, only she and the association had handled things, leaving him out. This time, he was taking down the dragon solo to claim all the reward items. He immediately activated Dark Lightning and began to strike the dragon with it. Seeing this, Nanas shouted, ordering everyone to run away. Just then, the effect of the Dark Lightning began to cause the rest of the bridge to collapse. The bridge divided into two, and Haruto, who almost fell into the water, managed to pull himself up and was happy to be alive. He looked down and saw that the blue truck and the team were hanging on a web, so he sighed in relief that the truck was fine. Suddenly, he turned around in fear at the sound of a crashing noise to find the unconscious body of the dragon in front of him. Nanas swiftly covered his mouth and informed him that the dragon was just unconscious. Just then, Masato appeared midair next to Haruto and asked if they were survivors there. He then commended Haruto for doing a pretty good job, even though he was a low-level hunter. Haruto immediately noticed the emblem on his shirt and recognized it belonged to Future Guild, the number 3 guild in the country. Masato then noticed the tied-up bear and remarked that he didn't know the spider thread could be used that way, after which he clicked his finger and the bear exploded to pieces. Haruto watched in surprise that the guy had turned the bear into minced meat by just flicking his finger, and then wondered if he was also responsible for putting the dragon to sleep. That moment, his system notified him that he had leveled up and acquired an item for defeating the Burman King. Masato turned, telling Haruto that he heard the chime of leveling up and asked if it was for the weak monster he had just blown up. He laughed and then mockingly apologized for blowing the bear into pieces and getting his reward. Suddenly, a large claw fell to the ground, and Masato informed Haruto that he didn't need the Burman King claw and he could have it. Hearing this, Haruto was pissed to oblivion at the arrogant face, and before he could say anything, Nanase arrived. That Masato remarked that Haruto should be from the association since he and Nanas were acquainted, so it was obvious why he did not like him. On the other hand, Nanase informed Haruto that the support team were now evacuating the citizens, so he should go with them because when the dragon woke up, it would attack everything in sight. Haruto insisted that since the dragon was unconscious, it was the best time to eliminate it. Nanas cut him short, explaining that it was unfortunately impossible to annihilate the dragon because when a final boss HP goes below 30%, they activate their special moves. These special moves were of two types, Berserk and Wide Range attack. Both special moves cause the final boss to attack in all directions. She added that since the dragon was in the 3rd phase, which meant the dragon was sensing a threat to its life, it would attack so violently that it would end up destroying everything and anything around it. As they stared at the unconscious body of the dragon, she added that at the current phase of the dragon, it would protect itself with a barrier while absorbing mana from the surrounding environment, and any attack against it would be useless at this moment. Suddenly, the dragon abruptly opened its eyes, and Nanase exclaimed in fear that the dragon had woken up earlier than expected. However, Masato responded that it was the perfect time for the shockwave to activate and turn the dragon into a pile of rewards. Nanas turned, assuring Haruto that he would survive the shockwave effect, but Masato laughed and said the pathetic, weak, low-level hunter would never survive. That moment, Masato quickly charged at the dragon, and seeing him, Haruto picked up the Burman claw and muttered that even though this wasn't part of his plan, he would annihilate the dragon before Masato did. He added that he would do it as revenge for the tattooed freak arrogant behavior. After a while, Haruto checked on the other hunters, and Satoru, seeing him, asked if he had come to save them again, while Ares silently observed the web silk on her hands. Just then, Haruto turned to Ares and Grant, saying he needed a favor from them. He told them the situation was pretty bad, because the dragon had entered the third phase and would use an intense wide attack, leaving not even a stone standing. When that happened, it would be difficult to find the trailer and the longsword. So before that will occur, he wanted to eliminate the dragon, but he would need the collision dragon longsword, promising to return it after defeating the dragon. Hearing this, Ares and Grant stared at him in surprise, and then Grant yelled at him that there was no way in hell he would defeat the final boss dragon, so he should stop dreaming. Ares adjusted her glasses and told Haruto it wasn't possible. She then added that a large amount of mana was indeed needed to open the trailer, and due to them being poisoned by the robbers, they were unable to use mana at the moment. Hearing this, Grant stared at her, displeased, asking what she was doing. On the other hand, Haruto remarked that they should have told him earlier, which made Grant look at him in total shock that the guy had completely lost it. Meanwhile, our boy happily pointed to himself that everyone called him Mana Gopher because his skill was infinite mana generation. That moment, magical circles formed around Ares, as she stared in shock that truly mana was indeed overflowing. That instant, the magic circles surrounded the blue truck, and the seal broke. With that, Haruto didn't waste any time jumping off the bridge, thanking her and promising to keep to his word. Grant then approached Ares, asking why she was so gullible to have believed Haruto, but she told him she believed in her guts. At the same time, Haruto grabbed the door of the truck, looked inside, and thought to himself that finally the collision longsword would be his. Suddenly, as he entered the truck, the masked thief appeared behind him, saying though the operation failed, he was glad he followed along. Without hesitation, the masked guy unleashed his dagger and stabbed Haruto in the guts. Satoru and Sakami shouted in fear at seeing this, while Ares and Grant watched in anger. The masked thief then opened the box containing the collision longsword and said he never thought he would be able to get the longsword so easily. Suddenly, the blue system window appeared, announcing that due to the death of the user, the giant spider thread would be breaking. Immediately, the spider thread that held the truck in place broke, causing it to crash into the ocean. Just then, Haruto used his skill copy and paste to reappear behind the masked guy, and without hesitation, thrust a blade right through the guy's throat. After which he informed the guy that he was the type of person who remembered gratitude and grudges pretty damn well. With that, the man in the mask collapsed to the ground. Haruto then grabbed the glowing sword in his hands and happily smiled that finally the collision sword was in his. That moment, the blue system window appeared, asking if he wanted to copy the collision dragon longsword. He immediately clicked on yes, but the system informed him that his level was insufficient to copy the item. Seeing this, Haruto was horrified and wondered what was going on because the longsword could be equipped at level 30, and he was well above that he was on level 50. He begged the sword to stop playing this kind of prank on him. Suddenly, he heard a voice behind him, and in that instant, the masked man sliced his back as Haruto screamed in intense pain. Haruto collapsed to the ground instantly while the masked man standing over him remarked that if he didn't have any healing skill, he would have been chilling with his maker. The masked man then grabbed hold of the collision longsword and told Haruto that to make sure he didn't survive death again, he would end him with the sword of his dream. Just then, the masked man stabbed Haruto on his back. Suddenly, the blue system window activated, notifying that the collision longsword had fused with his wielder. Another window popped, saying Haruto had copied and absorbed the ability of the collision longsword. Another appeared, saying he had absorbed the unique blood-sucking skill of the sword. Finally, the last window activated, saying he had successfully copied all the abilities of the collision longsword. The system then alerted that the user HP had fallen below 25%. With that, the collision longsword would now activate protection mode to defend its user, and the berserk mode had been forcibly activated. Meanwhile, back on the bridge, the dragon had formed a massive white ball in its mouth, and on seeing it, Masato shouted that the dragon had activated its wide area attack, and the situation was now worse than ever. Suddenly, out of under the water, a yellow magic slash emerged, slicing the dragon into two halves. That moment, the system window activated, saying the final boss dragon had been defeated and the dungeon had been cleared. Several hours later, at the Japan's Hunter Association building, an announcement was made from the speaker concerning the Rainbow Bridge dungeon break. It stated that there were many casualties and collateral damages. But thanks to the prompt action of the Hunters Guild, the situation was resolved in less than 2 hours. Tukuo, the chairman of Japan's Hunter Association, told the rest of the board not to have a sad face because they would analyze how the situation of the dragon was handled. Just then, a man with a criminal face named Gu said with displeasure that he heard about 3 months ago that the Rainbow Bridge dungeon had been cleared out. However, a low-budget Doctor Strange told him clearing the dungeon doesn't actually guarantee that it won't collapse again. Hearing this, a guy interrupted, telling the Doctor Strange ripoff to keep quiet, that the dungeon shouldn't have collapsed if there was proper management. Meanwhile, Nanase stayed silent, wondering if Haruto was able to escape from disaster. That instant, Gu slammed his hands and said he was only interested to know if Nanase, who was always acting like the Barbie of the association, was able to finish off the dragon. Hearing this, Nanase smiled and placed her hand on the table. That instant, the table cracked underneath her hand and shards flew around the office. Meanwhile, a red barrier encapsulated Masato, while he drank from a cup unbothered like a true male Sigma. A man loudly exclaimed, asking Nanas what she was doing and telling her there was no need for her to show off. On the other hand, Gu was pissed and started to emit a bright aura even in his eyes, but President Tuko simply apologized for the rude behavior of his staff. Gu then threatened that if Nanas continued to be insolent, he would end her beautiful existence. Nanas abruptly stood up from the chair, explaining that she thought of showing them the shock power she received when she had once defeated the dragon rather than talking. She added that Masato could attest to the power, but Masato smiled and said he was too busy and had not yet checked the reward. However, he did not think she was lying, but wondered why Nanase had decided to drag him into the matter. Just then, President Tuko mentioned that it was because of Masato's hard work that the whole mission was successful, so he thanked him for his effort and applauded him. Everyone in the room began to applaud Masato, but Nanas just smiled and refused to clap. This made Masato think Nanas was belittling him because she knew he didn't do in the mission, so he promised to pay her and Haruto back for the humiliation. With that, Nanase stood up saying she would investigate the cause of the dungeon break, and she would be excusing herself since no one had any concern about her ability. Just then, the office door opened as Grant and Ares stepped into the office. Grant introduced himself as a member of the International Hunters Association and informed them that he had an important matter to share with them. He revealed that because of the dungeon break, the Collision Dragon Longsword had been stolen. He then dropped a file on the desk, mentioning that it was from the International Hunger Association, requesting their cooperation in finding the sword. Gu immediately jumped in, asking that he thought the truck's magic seal was removed by them when the truck was attacked. Hearing this, Ares adjusted her glasses and told him they had unsealed the truck due to a request from the Japanese hunters, Satoru and Haruto. Upon hearing this, Tuko, Nanas, and Masato were stunned. Meanwhile, Dr. Strange ripoff covered his mouth not to laugh and responded, saying truly Satoru was a member of the Great Sage Guild. And before he could finish his statement, Tuko interrupted that they had no record of anyone named Haruto. Upon hearing this, Nanas gritted her teeth in anger while Masato smiled and thought this was the perfect opportunity for his revenge. Masato then said he was surprised the guy was not a member of the Hunters Association because on the bridge the guy and Nanas seemed to know each other very well. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a man named Takumi was holding the Collision Dragon Sword in his hands and said this was the sword that raised the user's level by 200. He smiled, saying that the millions of dollars spent on causing a dungeon break was indeed worth it. Hearing this, the masked man was surprised that it was truly his boss who was responsible for the dungeon break. Takumi then remarked that it was a pity the masked man lost all his comrades, so the masked man bowed his head, asking for forgiveness and explained that during the heist he had encountered a deranged person, but assured Takumi that the crazed person's existence had surely been wiped from the face of the earth. Hearing this, Takumi chuckled and then threw down a bag of cash, telling him the share of the dead now belonged to him to do as he pleased. The masked man happily collected the money bag and told Takumi that he would report the mission as a success. Shockingly, Takumi responded, telling him the mission was an utter failure. Hearing this, the masked man was stunned and asked Takumi what he meant. Takumi smiled, asking who would sell such a valuable sword for just $1 million. He then informed the masked guy that he knew he would also want to sell the information about the long sword. Upon hearing this, the masked guy quickly jumped up, saying a failed mission in the guild meant he had planned on executing him from the start. Takumi immediately swung his sword at him, saying the fewer people that knew about the longsword, the better. The attack sent the masked guy crashing into the window, eliminating him instantly. At that moment, the system window activated, notifying that the collision sword's durability had been reduced. Takumi then adjusted his hair, saying it would be a shame if the sword broke while he still held it. A voice suddenly echoed, "Remember, it was a gift from me." At that moment, our boy jolted awake, gasping for air as he clutched his throat, choking. A small burning hourglass symbol appeared on his neck, and he cursed in pain, realizing the hourglass had started moving again. Out of nowhere, Satoru burst in, hugging him tightly, saying he was relieved Haruto had finally woken up, as he was beginning to think he had entered the afterlife. Haruto brushed him off, telling him to quit with the cheesy jokes. Satoru, however, kept his serious tone, saying he couldn't joke about things like that after what went down on the bridge. Just then, a random idiot stirred awake, asking if they were at the Rainbow Bridge dungeon. Satoru confirmed, explaining everything that had happened there. Haruto, meanwhile, sat up, clutching his head as a sharp pain shot through it. Sakae then mentioned to him that while Satoru might look like a monumental loser, he'd actually been the one who saved Haruto, leaving him stunned. Sakae went on, saying Satoru had refused to give up and even convinced the Great Sage Guild's search team to keep looking, finally finding Haruto unconscious on the beach. Haruto, hearing this, wondered how an average dungeon hunter like Satoru could influence a big guild, and then it hit him. Satoru and the guild master shared the same last name. Could they be related? He muttered to himself because this kind of plot twist only happened in low-budget Bollywood films. Meanwhile, in the Hunter Association chairman's office, Nanas questioned if Haruto had finally met his end. Grant confirmed, saying he'd seen it himself, that asked why she didn't seem surprised. Nancy placed her mug down, replying that being a hunter always came with risks. Grant stared at her, bewildered by her cold attitude. President Tuko interjected, saying they had received a request for cooperation, reassuring Grant that the Japan Association would do its utmost to help track down the stolen longsword. Ares jumped in, urging Tuko to send top-level hunters, as they'd found a possible lead. Hearing this, Tuko was shocked at how they had managed to get the location of the sword so quickly. The Collision Dragon longsword was a bound item engraved with patterns that were used to determine the user level. Ares used the pattern to track the location of the sword, and about an hour ago, someone used it around. She added that before it was stolen, the sword had a durability of 10, but after being used, the durability had reduced. Grant looked at Ares in surprise, and Nanas jumped in, saying if the durability continued to plummet, the weapon would disappear. Nanas revealed that the sword was the only clue to finding Ares' mother, the only one who disappeared during the Great Disaster 15 years ago. Hearing this, Ares looked at her surprised and then asked how she knew. Nanas then pulled out an information folder, telling her she had done her background research. She also added that she knew that the stolen longsword was her mother's heirloom. Hearing this, Ares stood up immediately and begged Nanas to help her retrieve her mother's heirloom. Following that, Nanas walked down the corridor and thought to herself that Ares and Grant were definitely hiding something. She also thought that the story of Haruto meeting his end just didn't make any sense to her, because the guy didn't look like someone who could die so early into the story. Just then, Dr. Strange called to her, asking why she was upset, so she responded by telling him nothing important. He then informed her that it was about time she returned to the Great Sage Guild. Nanas sighed heavily and told him the number of guilds had increased. With that, the big guilds that should be managing them were busy playing capitalism with it, concerned only with making money from the dungeon like it was the stock market. She added that if it was found out that the dungeon break was caused by their actions, they would be in deep trouble. Later that night at the Central Hunter Hospital, Haruto stayed on the roof, checked his status and said even though he didn't copy the longsword as a weapon, he managed to absorb its abilities. He smiled, looking uglier than a gorilla, and then said even if he had copied the sword it would still be useless because he couldn't take it out hunting. He was excited because the Berserk skill, which doubled the user's abilities and level, activated just in time. Thanks to the Berserk, he was able to cut down the dragon with a level of 400. That night, after defeating the dragon, the system notified him that he had acquired a reward for annihilating the dragon. The system alerted, asking him to copy the dragon's shockwave's ability. According to the system, his copy ability had also evolved, and when combined with the dragon shockwave, the skill had morphed into resonant frequency skill. When combined with his paste ability, it became a skill called a natural wave, The system added that his spider web had also leveled up, and when using the spider thread, he could simultaneously use the natural wave and the blood-sucking. Later on, while Haruto was in the elevator, he thought about how wonderful his ability had become to the point of absorbing skills, which made him smile like a lunatic. He had just tried using his resonant skill, which was amazing. Now, he was a level 276 hunter. The thought made him smile again, but everyone in the elevator was dying in fear of how disgusting his face was. However, now he just needed to find the guy who stabbed him and get his hands on the longsword. Suddenly, he turned when he heard Nanas telling someone he should have run immediately. It got dangerous. Hearing this, our boy quickly hid in fear, wondering who she was talking to and why she was in the hospital. On the other hand, Satoru exclaimed, saying it was Nanas's fault the dungeon was not sealed properly, and Nanas responded by asking if his senses had evaporated. Seeing them argue, Haruto's dead brain awakened, and he realized that Nanase was Satoru's sister, since they both answered the same last name, Shinoda. He remembered Sakabe telling him Satoru had forced the association to look for him, so it finally made sense that the duo were siblings. At the same time, Nanase asked Satoru if Haruto was saved as well, and where he was. Satoru replied that he didn't know where he was. Hearing this, Haruto quickly hid behind a wall again and thought that for Nanase to be looking for him, she must have found out that he was a scammer who tried stealing the longsword. With that, he decided to escape, but he accidentally bumped into something muscular, and a voice told him it seemed he was quite alright. In front of him was Grant, who stared down at him angrily and called him the useless longsword thief. Seeing him, Haruto was on the verge of a cardiac arrest. Grant immediately grabbed hold of his shirt and smashed him against the wall, saying the foolish bum managed to trick him by impersonating someone from the association. Haruto tried explaining that it was a misunderstanding, but Grant responded angrily that it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was obvious he was working directly with the thief. That moment, Grant unleashed his sword, swinging it at Haruto, but our boy was saved when Ares luckily stormed in, asking why Grant was displaying his isekai weapon at a hospital. Grant told her not to worry, that he would be done soon. He just wanted to make the disgusting humans suffer 1,000,000 times for scamming them. Seeing his determination, Haruto knew he had to use his skill or he would be on a one-way ticket to Nirvana. The system then notified him that the resonant skill had been activated, and at that moment, a shock came out of Haruto's hand, shattering the sword. Seeing this, Grant stared at the broken pieces of his sword in absolute surprise, while Saruto and Nanas were in shock at what they had just witnessed. Nanas recognized the shockwave to be the dragon's skill. She wondered where Haruto got it from and why the aura around him had changed all of a sudden. The scene transitioned to a stage where the crowd was buzzing like a Travis Scott performance. 3 hot chicks danced so well on stage that some bunch of losers lost their senses, and at the end of the performance, a girl and her team did the Beyonce pose. Following that, a baddie named Sarah opened the car door of her red Lambo and sat inside the driver's like the badass chick she was. Meanwhile, the rest of her team entered the bus and waved goodbye to her. However, as they drove, they gossiped about where Sarah found the money to purchase an expensive car and assumed she must have a rich sugar daddy. Meanwhile, Sarah was driving along the highway when a black G-Wagon crossed her, causing her to nearly lose control of the steering wheel. She immediately shouted angrily at the person, asking if he had drank 500 bottles of beer not to see her car coming. Just then, Takumi got out of the G-Wagon carrying a huge gun case and then dropped it on top of Sarah's car trunk. He then moved to the window, asking her if she was done with her shooting for the day, and then asked if they could go to the dungeon. Before long, the team found themselves on the rooftop of a crumbling building, the last place the collision longsword had been used. Nanas noted that there was nothing left, and after searching through the rubble, Ares agreed, saying they were too late. Turning around, Nanas remarked that they'd have to wait for the sword to be used again. Hearing this, Haruto thought hard, and suddenly exclaimed that the idiot who tried to murder him claimed he was from the Bloody Tower Guild. Nanas replied she'd never heard of it, guessing it was likely a dark guild. Meanwhile, Grant looked displeased, worrying that the sword might break if they waited. However, Nanas reassured him, saying they wouldn't have to wait because she had a lead that was very well informed on guild matters. 15 years ago, we saw monsters struck by lightning collapsing, while humans were left devastated. A young Sarah lay on the ground with tears in her eyes as a mysterious green energy approached her. On that day of the great disaster, she received a unique skill from an unknown being. Initially, she believed it marked her awakening as a hunter, but it was just a skill. That moment, a powerful green aura enveloped her while she held up her injured arm. The system then appeared, asking if she would like to activate Control Plus to return the target to its original state. Just then, a bright light appeared on her injured arm, and it healed. This skill worked on both humans and objects, as she even used it to return a torn plush rabbit to its original brand new state. So over the years, she took advantage of her skill to buy used broken gadgets, return them to their original state, and then sell them. She also made money treating injured people, but the skill had a limit, a mana limit. She needed a lot of money for her parents, who were involved in an accident and were hospitalized. She tried healing them, but her mana just wasn't enough. Only hunters could give mana, so with that she had to risk her life accompanying hunters to dungeons as a luggage carrier and also as a healer. Most times after helping them, she had to beg the worthless hunters for some mana. There were times it got worse. She even had to isekai, one who tried violating her mini-plots. That day, she sat on the ground, hugging her weapons tightly, her clothes torn and tears in her eyes. All she wanted was to get rid of the skill that had brought her so much pain. Just then, she heard a voice. She looked up. The man in the shadow said it was not enough that she had to beg for mana like a pathetic homeless beggar. And after saying that, Takumi appeared from within the shadow. Back to the present in Sarah's home, Takumi stood across the table, asking Sarah why her house smelled worse than an anime convention and was emptier than an old shell. He added to think that a popular singing star like her lived like a brokey, but Sarah just stayed quiet. Takumi asked why she was eating like a glutton, since idols like her should be slim and on a diet, but Sarah continued to chew silently on her food. However, he said it didn't matter how much she ate because she could just return everything to the original. With no response, Takumi moved straight to business. He said if they were going to continue the contract, he didn't care what she did with her life. Sarah then slammed the fork on the table, asking why she had to go into the dungeon this time. She wiped her mouth and said Takumi could just collect the mana and give it to her like he always does. Takumi then showed her the collision longsword and said he wanted her to return the sword to its original form, but it would require a large amount of mana. He promised that this would be the last time she went into the dungeon. Hearing this, Sarah looked curiously excited, and Takumi said yes, he would surely deliver on his promise. Sarah then asked excitedly if he had found an infinite mana-generating item in the dungeon. Takumi said no, but she went with him to the dungeon. There was a possibility the item would appear. Meanwhile, back at the Future Guild building, Haruto asked Nanas if the lead she was talking about was Masato, and she responded yes. Haruto complained that it would have been better if they asked the Midas Guild for information. Nanas turned, saying that even though the Midas Guild had the world's best information. However, when it came to clearing dungeons and management, Masato's desire to conquer dungeons was greater than anyone else. Inside Masato's office, he shouted the giant golem's heart, while the team stared at him like he was deranged. He smiled and informed them that the golem's heart was known for its infinite mana generation ability. Hearing this, Nanas said surprisingly that the item was the reward for defeating the hidden boss of the Golem Snowy Mountain. Masato said exactly, and to get the item, they had mobilized their investigation team to gather up information about it. That was when they stumbled upon the Blood Tower Guild Korudo mentioned about. Because the guild planned on sending a team to clear the Snowy Mountains, they had started recruiting people already. Masato stated that the Blood Tower Guild was actually more dangerous than imagined, because they steal and assassinate VIPs and dungeon parties without giving a shit about the consequence. On the other hand, Haruto thought an item that generated infinite mana would be useless to him. It was definitely an amazing item anyone would murder to get their hands on. However, he wondered what all this had to do with the longsword, and if the Blood Tower Guild had stolen the sword to eliminate the Golem King. At the same time, Nanasi asked if the Blood Tower Guild had already found the Golem's heart to be making a move to conquer the Golem's Snowy Mountain. Ares adjusted her glass and said that was not the case because ever since the hidden dungeon had been found 15 years ago, the Golem's heart had not been discovered. Haruto asked in surprise how Ares knew all this as if she were a human chat GPT. Ares said she knew her onions because she had been interested in this particular dungeon for years. According to a study, the Golem's Snowy Mountain dungeon was difficult to conquer, making it one of the dungeons hunters like to avoid. Hearing this, Masato said there must be something really valuable inside the dungeon. Haruto then asked when the Blood Tower Guild was planning on going to the dungeon. Masato responded that since recruitment was over, they should have gone already. Just then, Nanase stood up, saying they should head their right way, and then asked Masato if he had a team ready. Masato smiled embarrassingly and said he didn't have any team on standby. Days later, it was snow fell on the snowy Golem Mountain, and monstrous snow golems with red glowing eyes stayed in the middle. These golems were difficult to eliminate because they had regenerating powers and could only die if their core was destroyed. Just then, Masato, accompanied by the team, arrived at the snowy mountain. A man in a jacket slashed the arm of a snowman golem, but the arm swiftly regenerated and counterattacked him. At that moment, Masato shouted that they needed to destroy the core quickly to prevent it from regenerating. Masato then shattered the golem into pieces with a burst of dark lightning, demonstrating to the beta male how it's done. He then instructed them again to smash the cores that were falling out of the broken golems. The men in snow jackets grinned and began destroying the cores on the ground, remarking how simple it was. Watching them, Haruto commented that these weaklings didn't want to join in at first, but now they were as excited like kids grabbing candy from a piñata. Just then, Ares informed them that once they entered the dungeon, they needed to hunt down as many golems as they could. Haruto asked why, and Mrs. Wikipedia explained it was the requirement for summoning the mid-level boss, as this was an inductive dungeon. The dumb protagonist then asked what an inductive dungeon was, and Masato jumped in as if someone had called for him, saying it was tricky. He explained that inductive dungeons have hidden layers, with various stages that must be completed to reach the final boss area. These stages include clearing trash mobs, facing a mid-boss, discovering a hidden dungeon, and ultimately battling the boss. If any stage is skipped, the following ones won't appear. Ares added that 15 years ago, something must have gone wrong in following this order, which is why the hidden dungeon hadn't appeared back then. Haruto clarified, asking if they just needed to clear as many trash mobs as possible to summon the mid-boss. Ares confirmed, explaining that since they didn't know how to reset the dungeon, they had no other choice. She added that they had to act quickly if they wanted to claim the mid-level boss reward, the key to the next stage before the Bloody Tower Guild did. However, Haruto was only interested in retrieving the dragon sword and returning it on time. Just then, the system activated, and he used the web of the Great Mother Spider to bind up the golems. At that moment, the system notified him that a shockwave had been triggered by his use of the spider web. Immediately, a massive golem exploded into pieces. Seeing this, the men in jackets were stunned, surprised that the weak spider web could be used so effectively. Meanwhile, Ares was working her magic and signaled for Grant to finish things off. Grant replied, "Say less," and slashed the golems, destroying their cores. On the other side, a golem was about to send the three low-lives in jackets to their ancestors when Nanasa leaped in, placed her hand on the golem, triggered a shockwave, and blew the creature into pieces. Landing on the ground, she asked the men if they were okay. The pathetic, weak men nodded, thanking her for saving their worthless lives. However, she noticed a mysterious figure in a blue snow jacket and looked at him suspiciously. She ordered him to stay where he was. When he turned, she asked what he was doing there. Satoru replied, asking what was wrong, and explained that he'd come as part of Haruto's team. Several hours earlier, Satoru had been rolling on the ground, crying that he wanted to go to the dungeon too. Haruto watched the pitiful scene as Satoru stood up and suggested that if Haruto got lost again, as he had on the bridge, he could help. However, Haruto told him he wouldn't be going alone. Finally, Haruto agreed to let Satoru join as part of his team, making Satoru ecstatic. In the present, Nanas wondered what Haruto was thinking, bringing along this foolish monkey. Satoru shouted at her not to underestimate Haruto's decision-making skills, and reminded her that back at the bridge, it wasn't her or Masato who defeated the dragon, it was Haruto. Hearing this, Nanase admitted that Haruto had indeed grown stronger since they first met in the dungeon. She then observed Haruto wreaking havoc on the monsters, and concluded he was using the shockwave skill he'd acquired from the dragon on the bridge. Meanwhile, in another part of the dungeon, Takumi and Sarah stood in the center of the dungeon, watching. Takumi pointed out how the useless morons were busy clearing the dungeon for them. A masked man stabbed his sword into the ground, shattering a core, and Takumi remarked to Sarah that they were stealthily taking advantage by posing as part of the team. He explained that they were able to hide their stealth gear and weapons, making their deception simple and efficient. He smiled, noting that this was the Blood Tower Guild's way. He then asked Sarah if the mana transfer was going smoothly. Sarah, holding a battery that collected mana, remained silent. This item, called a mana transmitter, was highly valuable. To fill one with mana, at least 100 trash mobs had to be defeated. Sarah then glanced at the longsword and wondered how much mana it would take to return the sword to its original form, concluding it would likely require a lot. She asked if they would need to defeat the dungeon's hidden boss. Takumi replied they might indeed have to, mentioning there was a powerful barrier within the hidden dungeon that only the collision dragon longsword could cut through. When Sarah asked how he'd learned this, Takumi told her to focus on gathering mana instead of asking questions. Sarah then thought about the mana-generating item and wished she could get her hands on it to save her parents. Meanwhile, our boy slashed through a golem, complaining he'd already taken down 200 of these creatures and still saw no end to them. Suddenly, a red magic stone flew into his hand, and he noticed it was different from the usual gems, thinking it might be worth copying. But just as he tried, the stone sunk deep into the ground. At that moment, Masato approached him and announced that the next stage had begun. Horuto immediately asked what he meant, and Masato replied that the golem clearing hunt was progressing to the next zone, where a shadow golem, the intermediate boss, would appear. Suddenly, a monstrous level 150 shift golem appeared before the team, launching an attack that threw them off balance. Seeing this, Masato ordered everyone to fall back, then unleashed dark lightning on the creature, shattering it into pieces. The guys in jackets were stunned that with just one strike, the monster was obliterated. But then the golem's red core appeared, pulling the pieces of the golem back together, leaving the team in shock. In that moment, the monstrous shift golem regenerated, prompting Masato to strike it again with dark lightning, shattering it a second time. The monster's red core appeared again, spinning rapidly, and Horuto decided it was the perfect time to try restraining it with his spider thread. He attached the thread, which began wrapping around the core. However, just as the spider thread encircled the core, the shift golem's pieces started reforming around it, and a monstrous black shift golem emerged. Seeing this, Horuto was shocked, realizing the spider thread wasn't enough to trap the core, and something drastic needed to be done before it merged with the other golems. Just then, a voice called for Horuto to fall back. Nanase immediately unleashed Hellfire on the shift golem, but her attack was useless, leading her to conclude they'd need to melt the monster's body. Masato, annoyed, said he was already aware of this and didn't need her showing off. He added that he was searching for another solution, but might need to consider melting the fragments if no other option appeared. After a brief pause, Ares informed the team that the shift golem was the dungeon's most challenging foe, and for the next zone to appear, they had to defeat it. She explained that after defeating all the golems, the shift core would emerge, gathering the remains of the rock golems to regenerate them. Hearing this, Masato crossed his arms, stating that they would need to fight the golem they'd already beaten. Nanas chimed in, explaining that there were two ways to defeat it, either destroy the core or melt its remains. On the battlefield, Nanas launched another round of hellfire at the shift golem, but sighed in frustration when her attack merely massaged its body. She then noticed the creature had moved behind her, so she spun around and cast hellfire at it again. Meanwhile, Horuto observed Ares and thought that if he used the longsword's abilities, she might catch on. With her current pace, breaking the core seemed impossible. But then, his brain cells finally clicked, reminding him of a skill he hadn't yet used. He quickly activated the Burman King Claw, which allowed him to hold any target for a limited time and enter the target to deal damage. Grinning, he held the Burman Claw in his hand, absorbing its power. Combining the Burman ability with his pace skills, Horuto gained the strength to grip any target firmly, and with his copy ability, he could penetrate a target and absorb 15% of its HP and MP. With this in mind, Horuto charged at the shift golem, hoping the skills would work. Meanwhile, Nanase stood in front of the shift golem, casting hellfire for the 100th time that day. Ares then began assisting her with magic to prevent Nanas from exhausting her mana. However, Nanase's latest attack had no effect, and the shift golem retaliated, surprising her when she realized she might be out of mana. At the last second, the creature was bound by spider thread, wrapping its entire body like a cocoon. That moment, Horuto stood in front of the monster while Nanas and Masato watched, astonished that the spider thread could restrain the golem like that. Horuto then turned to Masato, asking him to attack the creature again. Masato hesitated, but Horuto assured him he could stop the core's movement and urged him to hurry. Gritting his teeth, Masato agreed to follow Horuto's plan just this once. He released a burst of dark lightning, shattering the monster to pieces once more. Horuto quickly activated his pasting skill, causing the spider thread to wrap around the shift golem's red core. Watching this, Horuto smiled, realizing the plan had worked, while Masato opened his mouth wide in shock that the boy actually caught the red core with the useless reward item. Nana C, on the other hand, looked on, surprised at how much stronger Horuto had become. She remembered how, back in the Spider Boss dungeon, he'd been the only survivor, and later, he'd managed to deliver in the battle against the dragon on the bridge. She smiled, realizing that Horuto had always shown up in critical moments. Meanwhile, Ares noted that the Vermin Claw had now become Horuto's signature style, while Grant looked on in amazement. The rest of the team cheered, excited that the core's movement had been stopped. At that moment, the entire battlefield was covered with a giant spider thread. At the same time, Takumi watched in confusion, and Sarah asked if Horuto had just managed to halt the core's movement. Takumi quickly put on his mask, telling her that the mana collection was complete and it was time to accelerate their plan. He ordered his men to take their positions, and the masked guys immediately moved accordingly. Alarmed, Sarah asked why Takumi would need to step in personally. Takumi responded that because of the stranger with the web ability, capturing the core's key would be more challenging, and he instructed her to be prepared. Will Horuto be able to defeat the Snow Mountain Dungeon's final boss and obtain the Collision Dragon Longsword? Comment copy-paste if you're eager to find out in our part 2. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching.